If your income stopped tomorrow, how long would you survive? For most people, the answer is not long. But there is one asset that quietly changes that answer, and it's not what most people expect. Not stocks, not crypto, not even a business in the traditional sense. Something far more basic. Farmland. Now this sounds strange at first. Because in modern financial thinking, farmland is not seen as freedom, it's seen as slow, old, uninteresting. But that perception is exactly where the misunderstanding begins. Because the real question is not, how much money do you make? The real question is, how long can you survive without new income? And that is where everything changes. Most people are trapped in a very specific system without even realizing it. They earn income, they spend it, they repeat it. And on the surface, it feels normal. But underneath, it creates a fragile structure. If income stops, life stops adjusting almost immediately. Rent is due, bills are due, loans are due, obligations continue regardless of income flow. This creates something economists rarely talk about directly. Financial dependency is not just a condition, it is a pressure system. And pressure changes behavior. It forces people to accept jobs they don't like, it limits risk-taking, it reduces long-term thinking, it creates constant mental noise in the background of life. Most people call this normal life, but it is actually a survival loop. Now here's where the contradiction begins. Because while most people are optimizing for income, a small group of people are optimizing for something else entirely. Not income, not salary, not even returns. They are optimizing for survival independence. And that's where productive assets come in. But before going further, we need to break a common assumption. Not all assets behave the same way. Some assets are purely financial. Their value exists only in markets. Others are productive. Their value exists in real-world output. This difference is critical because financial assets often depend on timing, sentiment, and liquidity. But productive assets depend on something much more stable, utility. And utility is what becomes valuable when systems become uncertain. Now let's talk about farmland in that context. At first glance, farmland does not look powerful. It does not feel like a modern wealth symbol. It does not appear in social media success narratives. It does not look exciting, but economically, it has a very simple logic behind it. Land can produce value without requiring constant external approval. Food production, agricultural output, resource generation, lease income in some cases. It is not dependent on hype cycles. It is dependent on human survival needs. And those needs do not disappear in recessions, crashes, or inflation cycles. This is where the psychological shift begins because most people measure wealth through consumption ability. Can I buy more? Can I upgrade? Can I afford more lifestyle? But productive ownership changes that measurement entirely. It shifts the question from, what can I buy to, what can I sustain? And sustainability creates a very different emotional experience. Now, here is the turning point most people miss. Modern financial stress is not caused only by low income. It is caused by single-point dependency, one income source, one job, one paycheck cycle. That structure creates vulnerability. Because if the single source breaks, everything else becomes unstable instantly. This is why even high-income individuals often feel financial anxiety. Their income may be large, but their structure is still fragile. Now contrast that with even partial productive ownership. Not complete independence, not full replacement of income, but just a layer of production that reduces pressure. That alone changes psychological stability. Because now survival is not entirely tied to external approval systems. There is a backup layer, a physical layer, a real-world layer, and this is where farmland becomes conceptually important. Not because everyone becomes a farmer, but because it represents a different category of wealth. Wealth that reduces dependency instead of increasing consumption. And this is where the narrative shifts sharply. Because most of modern finance education teaches earn more, invest more, grow more. But it rarely teaches reduce dependency, reduce pressure, reduce fragility. Yet psychologically, those are not the same thing. One expands lifestyle, the other expands stability. And in uncertain economies, stability often matters more than expansion. This is why, across history, during inflation periods, supply shocks, or economic instability, societies always return attention to productive assets. Because when systems become less predictable, people stop valuing appearance and start valuing survival. Structure. Now here is the deeper psychological layer. Most people underestimate how much financial pressure shapes their thinking. Constant financial urgency changes decision-making in subtle ways. You accept short-term gains over long-term planning. You avoid risk even when opportunity exists. You delay strategic decisions because survival feels urgent. In simple terms, pressure reduces freedom of thought, and that is the hidden cost of financial dependency. Now imagine even partial relief from that pressure. Not luxury, not wealth explosion, just reduced urgency. That alone changes how a person thinks about money. They become less reactive, more patient, less emotionally driven in financial decisions. And patience is one of the most underrated financial advantages because most financial mistakes are not intelligence problems, they are timing problems created by stress. This is why the concept of productive assets becomes psychologically powerful. It does not just generate value. It changes behavior, and when behavior changes, financial outcomes eventually follow. Now bring it back to the core idea. Why does everything change after your farm starts paying your bills? Because something fundamental shifts in your identity. You stop being someone who only survives through active work, and you start becoming someone who has a layer of survival outside the traditional system, even if it is small, even if it is partial. That change is not just financial. It is psychological. Because for the first time, survival is not fully dependent on a single fragile system, and once the realization happens, money is never interpreted the same way again. It stops being only about consumption. It starts becoming about structure, stability, independence, reduced fear, long-term control. And in a world where most people live under constant financial pressure, even a small shift in that direction feels powerful, not because it looks impressive, but because it feels different. And that feeling is what most people are slowly beginning to search for, without even realizing it yet.